everyone, welcome back to Beyond the Veil Tarot and Astrology. My name is Candice Marie. Thanks for joining me. I'll be your astrologer today. Happy Tuesday, everybody. I hope you guys are doing well and thriving post-solar eclipse in Aries. Today we're going to be tackling the topic of this incoming Mars conjunct Saturn in Pisces. If you guys like my content, you want to see more of it, make sure you click the bell button below. This will subscribe you to the channel and you'll be alerted as to when I have new videos on my YouTube. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Sharing is caring. Give me a thumbs up and let me know. How are you guys feeling with this conjunction? What are you anticipating? And are you born with a natal Mars-Saturn conjunction in your natal chart? All right, so you guys are watching this on the 9th. That's when this is being put out. But the truth is that since we've been coming into the solar eclipse energy in Aries these last few days, this transit has already been heating up. So I usually work with like a 2 or 3 degree orb. So we've been feeling this really since the weekend, and it is going to continue for the next couple of days. Although the Mars-Saturn conjunction will be exact on April 10th, 2024. Now, I have news for you guys. In many ways, this is something that's going to play out for some time, primarily because Mars-Saturn cycles, when this conjunction happens, will play out for nearly 2 years. I'm going to take you guys through the dates of when this is going to get reactivated. We're going to talk a little bit more about the themes also revolving around this particular conjunction, and I'm going to give you guys some examples of how it's played out throughout history. I also recommend listening to your April 2024 horoscopes. I'll plug the link somewhere. You'll see it at the end of this video, I'm sure, but I do discuss this conjunction for each and every one of the 12 rising signs. So if you want to know how this is going to be impacting you personally, maybe you happen to be an Aries or a Scorpio rising, this is important for you guys because you're ruled by Mars. Or maybe you happen to be a Capricorn, Aquarius, or Pisces rising. This is equally important for you as well because Mars will be making an aspect to Saturn either in your sign or to your planetary ruler. So this will be impacting everybody. You don't have to have personal placements in Pisces to feel it, but certainly if you have anything around 12 to 16 degrees of Pisces, Sun, Moon, rising, or personal planet, you will be impacted by this transit. Definitely check out those horoscopes. It's very helpful. I take you guys through the most important phases of April, and I talk about what it means for your sun, moon, or rising sign. Now, like I said, special attention to people who are ruled by Mars and people who are ruled by Saturn, because Mars is the faster moving planet, right? So Mars is actually aspecting Saturn. We're going to talk about the archetypes and what this means, but I'll tell you guys that Mars-Saturn conjunctions have historically been associated with very significant world events. Some of these particular conjunctions have coincided with periods of heightened tension, conflict, and also changes with political fortune. Now, in the context of this upcoming Mars-Saturn conjunction that we're going to be experiencing over the next few days, it's expected to occur on the 10th, but it's been kind of in play since the eclipse. So the solar eclipse that we just had yesterday is going to be really active for the immediate next 3 to 6 months. And that will also have effects for the better part of the next several years. So this will unfold over time. But I do feel like this does highlight in the sign of Pisces the potential for natural calamities, man-made disasters happening around the world. This conjunction can also create a gradual increase of stress and aggression in life. And it will, have this peak now, but we will start to see through some kind of conflict, agitation, feeling kind of, burnt out or beaten down. There's going to be kind of aftershocks that we'll be experiencing throughout the next couple of months. Now, conjunctions are considered to be the strongest aspect in astrology. So with Mars and Saturn in conjunction, it basically means that Mars is moving and it forms the exact same conjunction per degree as Saturn. We see this every 2 years, so it's nothing unusual, but it is something that's worthy of studying because I do feel like it gives us some insight as to where we need to really be working harder, Mars, when it comes to our goals, taking more action, being more assertive, and also having some sense of form, commitment, dedication, maturity, right? Saturn. Whenever I think of Mars Saturn conjunctions, I think of Mr. Miyagi from Karate Kid, and how he's always, like this like strict teacher and instructor, but he's also meant to be a guide and somebody who shows his students form, the wax on, wax off, right? That's very like Mars Saturn. Sometimes Mars Saturn conjunctions in a natal chart can manifest as, feeling a bit temperamental, or being somebody who's got some issues revolving around, kind of reining in their temper. It can also reflect on, people who have a difficult time expressing that, or, using their anger in positive ways. So it's not abnormal when you see a hard aspect between Mars or Saturn that there can be some challenges in terms of what you do with that aggression, what you do with that will. Now, the Sabian symbol for this particular conjunction, it's going to be 15 degrees of Pisces, because we do round up. And this is, I've read it to you guys before, but I'll read it again. An officer preparing to drill his men. Many of you guys have asked about this book. This is the book that I use by Diana Roche. And it is based off of, the Elsie Wheeler kind of predictions. There's a few different variations of the Sabian symbols, but they all generally tend to be the same. It'll differ depending on the author's interpretation, but if you want to get a copy of this book, click the links in the description below this video. You're going to see a link that says my book list, and I have all of the books that I reference on the channel and things that I use to study astrology that I also recommend to my students. Okay, so 15 degrees of Pisces, an officer preparing to drill his men. The theme is making the best of it. The symbol speaks to the desire to avoid consequences by shifting responsibility or blame upward or downward in a hierarchy of authority. The image of an officer preparing to drill his men describes one of life's predicaments that is difficult, if not impossible, to get out of easily, and it stresses the importance of making the best of those situations that can't be avoided or immediately resolved by finding some higher value or purpose in the experience. Every individual gets out of life what he's willing to put into it. At its highest, it represents a can-do attitude with a knack for making every experience a profitable adventure. Watch for lack of enthusiasm and constant complaining about one's lot or how life is unfair. The accent is on ingenuity and self-discipline. You could resent being where you are, or trying to find a place for yourself that holds a greater potential for growth. Your greatest advantage lies in creating your own opportunities. Think positive about a situation you might be stuck in. When life gives you lemons, get out the sugar and water. Make lemonade. Guard against looking at the dark side of things. Don't whine and complain when you're being taken advantage of against your wishes. Life is what you make of it. So stepping stones are rehearsal, practice, instruction, exercise, lesson, correctness, efficiency, system, precision, organization, discipline, preparation, planning, maneuver, and workout. I think, it's interesting that it's taking place in the sign of Pisces, because Pisces has this kind of like finale type of feeling to it, right? Pisces is the final kind of sign of the 12 zodiac signs. So it does represent a cycle completing and like letting something kind of like wash away or fade away. But it can also have this feeling of being disempowered. It can be about feeling victimized, right? It has connections with Neptune. Being cast aside, or feeling like you're lost at sea and you have no support system. Like, these feelings can definitely come up with this conjunction. But in the background, I keep thinking about how this is baked into the eclipse. And the eclipse is basically saying this is this catalyst for change. There is something that's being eclipsed out of our life and something new is coming. And so we have to kind of roll with the punches and go, okay, this is difficult, or this is challenging, or in order to start this new thing, this other thing has to end. So that very much is tied to what we're feeling right now. And for many of us, we may not know quite how to begin again, right? The Mercury retrograde taking place in Aries. I also think about how Mars, Saturn, and Pisces can be like warriors for peace, spiritual warriors, peaceful, kind of resolutions of sorts, being able to, agree to disagree without conflict, being able to also dissolve discord and focus on moving forward and having more joy or more abundance in our life. I say this because the dispositor of Pisces is Jupiter, okay? And so as you guys are seeing this conjunction play out on the 10th, Jupiter is receiving a conjunction to the moon, so that feels pretty big. It generally feels pretty positive, pretty abundant. It can bring new opportunities for resources. We know that in astrology also the moon is like a trigger for events. So even the lunar transit that's taking place throughout the April 10th is reflecting what's going on with Mars and Saturn. It's like, for many of us, these things that are ending right now are actually, I think, a blessing in disguise. Right? Mars and Saturn and Pisces, a blessing in disguise. It's like, okay, well, that happened, what's next? And how are we actually taking the necessary steps forward in experiencing life, right? Taurus is an earth sign, but it's about growth. It's about resources, food, money, the earth, and better and stronger, I think, self-esteem. Now, it's nice that we're going to see at least a sextile that's kind of happening. It's a wide orb, about 5 degrees or so, but the moon Jupiter does talk about the positive effects that ultimately will manifest as a result of having to kind of work through some of these difficult, challenging, turbulent, and also kind of delays, right? I see Saturn as a speed bump or a stop sign. It can represent our relationship to authority, and it can also be about timing. So some of us may feel as if we're like, okay, we're not really ready, to take that leap of faith, or we're not really ready to make a significant jump. And even if we don't really know how it's going to play out or how it's going to end, we're having to kind of think on our feet and have faith, because Pisces represents I believe, right? I believe. That's why it has such a strong connection to, church and temple and organized religions. So we have to believe that some of these things that are happening for a purpose. It's teaching us a lesson. And it's also Saturn's way of basically saying we can't just coast through things any longer. We can't put off the inevitable. We can't play the victim. We can't blame other people. Literally, life is what we make of it right now. So if we're having a difficult time, then the only way, through it is through it to be able to get to the other side. Now, some themes that are going to come up for you guys, I think, with this conjunction, and you may see this immediately over the next week. You may see this play out over the next 2 years. Certainly when there's reactivations to this degree, when we see planets square this down the road, or when we see Saturn return to this particular degree, we're definitely going to see some of these themes unfolding. But I think this is also strongly connected to the North Node. Mars is a very important planet, at least until we get to the beginning of 2025, because that North Node is really kind of showing us or pointing us all collectively in the direction of independence. Being pioneering, being brave, courageous, not willing to kind of stand down from a conflict or a fight. So much of the North Node in Aries, South Node in Libra is about breaking away from relationships that really don't help us become who we're meant to become. And that can mean professional relationships, romantic relationships. It can mean that we're changing astrologers, therapists, and also making big changes in terms of the relationship with ourselves. Venus is in Aries right now, and so you guys are going to kind of feel like the next month is like self-preservation 101. You have to put your oxygen mask on first before you help other people. What may be best for you may mean that you have to change your relationship to others, and vice versa. But that North Node Saturn conjunction means that in order to become this new version of ourselves, or to embrace this gift that's been coming through with the eclipse, we really need to, I think, focus on belief, faith, and the willingness to kind of overcome not knowing, how things are going to play out. Now, I think about discipline and organization because, Saturn does want us to kind of get our act together. It wants us to maintain some sense of authority or boundary or timeline. So some of us may feel like with Mars, Saturn, I'm running out of time, or there's not enough time, or I'm limited as to, when I can get somewhere or do something. But usually with Saturn, Mars, Saturn is tapering the flames of Mars and basically saying, hold on a second, take a little bit more time. So the symbol can represent the importance of structure and discipline in achieving your goals. Like Saturn can quite literally say to Mars, if you want to get to where you're going, these are the things that you must complete first. These are the rules, these are the restrictions, this is, the boundary. You follow this form, and if you do this, then you're going to get to where you're going. And remember that Mars is still yet to come into Aries. So I think that we have to kind of go through like the cosmic washing machine right now with Mars and Saturn, where sometimes, to get to where we need to go, we need to rest. It may be quite literally the opposite. I have certainly kind of felt this, that, you know, typically an exalted sun in Aries and like a north node in Aries and a new moon in Aries is like, okay, we're ready to go. But with the ruler, Mars being in the 12th house to the eclipse in conjunction to Saturn, it's like, actually, no, we needed a little bit more quiet time, contemplation, reflection. We need a little bit more of a connection, I think, to our spiritual side, our higher selves. We need to have some kind of action plan, and we need to really believe in the vision that we're creating for our goals. And in order to get there, we may have to be willing to actually like let some things go. We may have to be willing to take an L in some certain situations, or decide that we're going to walk away or kind of dissolve certain things before we can have this new opportunity. I do think that this is about you know, the need for an individual to develop a clear plan and maintain a disciplined approach to their endeavors. And so I think of like Pisces as being the person who's got like the blueprints, and they're creating the collage or the pictures or the flow chart and like putting everything together behind the scenes before something is initiated by Aries, which will then be built by Taurus. So a lot of the frustrations that are coming up right now is kind of like, what am I envisioning? Like, how am I going to get there? And we may feel a little overwhelmed with like the end result, but stay focused on your vision. Like when you're meditating, or, you know, when you are manifesting, you have to hold that vision for your goals coming to fruition. You have to feel it, because Pisces is a water sign. And then as we kind of ingress with Mars into Aries, then we're going to be initiating new things. Thankfully, that's going to be coming at the end of the month. Post-eclipse fallout, post-Mercury retrograde. So it doesn't really feel like a time to start things. It's a time to reflect on what hasn't worked, what doesn't feel good, you know, what has been blocked, and kind of get to the bottom of it and kind of figure out, how can we solve this? How can we fix this? With Jupiter being the dispositor, I think a lot of it is about reassessing our values, you know, what we believe is valuable, what we believe about our relationship to the planet, to our own selves, our own sense of security, our own self-esteem. And we have to make some changes there with Jupiter and Uranus coming into conjunction. Now, with this conjunction, you know, they're within 2 degrees of each other. So we're going to only feel for like the next 10 days that growing intensity about some new big boom that's going to be happening out in the world. I think this is also about leadership and command. And I don't say that because of the Sabian symbol, although sometimes the Sabian symbols can be quite literal. You know, I've said for some time that with some of the Aries stuff going on, we're definitely going to be seeing some military drills happening. And it is taking place around the world. We're going to see a pretty big one that's going to be happening in May. That's going to include a number of countries who are affiliated with NATO. But I think that, you know, when I think of like officers or military personnel or generals, right, these are all kind of like Capricorn archetypes. I think of Saturn. And then I think of, you know, Mars being the warrior, being the soldier, being, you know, the fighter. And we've all seen, you know, famous, you know, fighters, boxers, you know, and they wouldn't be where they are without that trainer that's spending all of the, you know, hundreds of hours with them behind the scenes in the ring, training them, testing them, getting them up early, making sure that they're eating well, pushing them to their limits, and making sure that they are the best version of themselves. It's kind of like Rocky, you know? Or one of my favorite movies is The Fighter. I think about, you know, Christian Bale working with Mark Wahlberg, and how, you know, Christian, the older brother, you know, struggled with drugs and was in and out of, you know, treatments, and was on the street, and, you know, had one big, amazing kind of fight, and then sadly fell off, and he was like a mess. And throughout the movie, you kind of see the brother going through his own struggle, and trying to show up for his brother, but he can't really show up for himself. And so this reminds me a lot of Saturn and Mars, where, you know, Saturn can only be the best version of himself if he's clear, if he believes. And so with Mars, Saturn conjunct here, I kind of see like if Saturn is sick, because Saturn is conjunct Mars, so this can be about illness in older people. This can also be that we feel spiritually sick, we feel energetically sick, we feel hopeless. Then Saturn really can't offer Mars the best support. So then they can kind of quarrel and they can fight. So kind of tying it back to the movie The Fighter, They had lots of conflict and squabbles because he would go missing, he'd be doing drugs, he wouldn't show up to some of the fights, and he ultimately, you know, in the end ended up causing quite a bit of problems for him. And so it reminds me of that, because Pisces can deal with those who are in prison or in rehab or are dealing with drugs, alcohol, addiction, and self-undoing. So there can be some self-undoing qualities that can kind of come up with Pisces as well. So it's really up to you how you choose to use this energy. I've said for the last month that a lot of people are going to fall into camps. We're going to have one that's going to be like, forget it, there's no point, I give up, this is too much, you know, like the end is near, like, you know, we might as well start celebrating the apocalypse because we don't stand a chance. And then we're going to see other groups of people who are going to be more channeling that connection with, you know, Mars to Aries. That's like, no, the challenges that are being presented right now are quite literally some of the hurdles that make an excellent fighter, that make an excellent warrior, that make you stronger, more confident, faster, and also more capable, right? More capable of being self-sufficient. And really believing in it. So a little bit of friction with this Mars-Saturn conjunction can actually go a long way. It can push us out of our comfort zone and make us realize, like, you know what, I'm going to pick myself up off the floor. I'm going to keep going. And I know that the energy is going to feel very thick. I know that, you know, with the retrograde, there's a lot of people who are still trying to reassess and make personal changes. Communication is really haywire. I know I've heard a lot of it in the comments. I know, and I'm feeling it too. But I believe that the medicine here of this particular conjunction is that we have to see this ongoing fight, this ongoing getting up and starting every day and continuing forward. And if you fall down, you get right back up. Or if you fall off of, you know, a health routine or a habit or whatever, you don't throw in the towel. You say, okay, we're going to begin again, right? We're going to keep going and not let yourself get beat down. Mars is invisible right now. So that's the other thing, is Mars is, you know, behind, it's behind the sun. So when Mars becomes reborn in Aries, you guys are actually going to start to see that your hard work, dedication, and everything that you have been feeling like you've been sacrificing is finally going to start to become visible. We're going to see more action that's going to be coming as a result of that Mars ingress. And then eventually we'll also see Mars that's coming into Taurus, and it'll become physical manifested form, or it may become, you know, more in terms of resources. And then later this year, we're going to see a Mars-Jupiter conjunction. And so I do think that that's going to be also another manifestation of being like, okay, you know, we're now moving on to like yet another hurdle. So we'll get to that. But leadership and command, you know, the officer symbolizes leadership and the ability to command a group towards a common objective. And this can signify a need for individuals to take charge of a situation and develop leadership skills and to work collaboratively with others to achieve some kind of shared goal. So it is possible to achieve our goals, right? And that's very kind of like Sun and Mars. The Sun's in the midst of getting ready to come into a cazimi. I'm going to talk to you guys about that on Thursday. But this basically means that through this difficult situation, we're now starting to realize, you know what? This is what I'm choosing. This is the path that I'm choosing. This is what I'm going to make of it. Having a glass is half full type of mentality this week is going to get you so far. Counting your blessings and being appreciative of what you have versus what you don't have or what you're losing. There is somebody out there who is literally praying for the life that you have. And that's something that I would like constantly remind myself personally. You know, I've been doing that because it's like, okay, I can't really complain about certain things because I know that there are a lot of other things in the world that's going on that's a lot more challenging and difficult than what I'm going through. And maybe for me, that puts it in perspective a little bit. But I do think about like the teamwork and cooperation aspect where, you know, Mars and Saturn, they both have an agenda. They want to get something done. And likely a lot of this can be, you know, physical changes because Jupiter is the dispositor. More money, better resources, some kind of, you know, financial breakthrough, feeling more comfortable in your body, feeling a better connection to the earth. But the symbolizes the importance of teamwork and cooperation in order to achieve success. Well, I would see success as, you know, that Jupiter-Uranus conjunction coming up. It can be some big significant breakthrough. But it also can mean that, we on an individual level are needing to work more effectively with others, listening to different perspectives, collaborating to achieve a common goal, and respecting our elders, people who have been through more than we have, people who have seen more than we have, people also, I think of like Saturn as like historians. I think we're going to hear a lot of people talking about the history of war because Mars has connections to war. I think we're going to see a huge boom with a bunch of like war influenced films and movies, and they can be both historical but also kind of influenced with what's coming in the future. With Mars and Saturn, I think it might be space wars. I think it might be more about like historical documentation of wars and movies that are going to be influenced by previous kind of battles and conflicts and what leaders have kind of dealt with in the past. Because, Pisces rules movies and stuff relating to film. So we might be hearing about people talking about that, but I think from a historical perspective, I think we might be hearing more about survivors of like the Holocaust or survivors of various other, tragic kind of war, conflict related situations. And really talking about the fact that we don't need more wars. In fact, Mars-Saturn doesn't want war. Generally, this is an aspect that's like, no, we want to cease something. It stops here. Saturn creates that boundary. But unfortunately, with the eclipse and the retrogrades and the things that are going on, it's hard to find that ability to negotiate and kind of cool the flames a little bit. We're going to hear a lot of people who are going to be kind of getting spicy and agitated and frustrated with all these energies in Aries. And the North Node is about where we're at collectively. So it's safe to say with like Mars and the North Node and Saturn that collectively we don't want war. In fact, if anything, we may be feeling like we're fearing there being more tension or an escalation of conflicts in certain parts of the world. I do believe that this may manifest as things that are kind of going on in the ethers or what we're watching on screens and how that's influencing us on an emotional or psychological level and how we behave. So there's something to be said about that. I think the best aspect of a Mars-Saturn transit is definitely self-discipline and self-improvement. Because this symbol can be seen as a call to develop self-discipline and focus and personal growth. So it may suggest that the individual needs to work on self-improvement, self-awareness, and develop these skills in order to better achieve their goals. Pisces can mean a better meditation practice, more of a commitment to saying, I'm going to do that, 15 minutes every day. It may mean that you're committing to a new fitness or a health routine. It may mean that you're saying, I bought a brand new thermos of water. I'm going to be drinking my gallon of water every day, right, Pisces? It can mean that you're making more of an effort to pray, that you're making more of an effort to go to church or to go to temple or to go to yoga class. It could be something as simple as saying, I'm not going to hit the snooze button, and sleep in. I'm going to get up when my alarm goes off. Or better yet, I'm going to get up an hour early and I'm going to make that time to sit, meditate for a little bit, write my affirmations, get up, because this is all happening before planets are rising. So I do think that this is going to represent this kind of conscious stirring of the spirit that starts kind of happening. And then we start kind of realizing like, okay, nobody's going to do this but ourselves. And also nobody's going to come and save us but ourselves. We have to stop waiting around and anticipating or assuming that there is going to be something or someone that's going to swoop in and that's going to save us. The reality is that this is about everybody on an individual level choosing the path probably of the most resistance, but also the most results. Now, integration and balance is another big theme that we see with Mars-Saturn conjunctions because it does represent integration of various aspects of our life to achieve a specific goal. So it might suggest on a personal level that we need to balance different areas of our life to achieve overall success and fulfillment. So Mars-Saturn conjunctions can represent cutting back, cutting off, not spending as much because of that connection with Taurus, not eating as much because Taurus can be about consumption. I think many of us are also realizing that the effects of stress and not getting adequate sleep or constantly worrying or doom scrolling or watching too much Netflix is actually having a negative impact on our nervous system, right? Jupiter, Uranus, and Taurus, our physical experience. We live in a simulation, basically, right? I don't know if you guys believe that, I do. And we can so easily kind of get riled up by what we're reading in the news or what we're hearing on the radio or what we're seeing on, social media, that it's almost making like a situation where we're so completely disconnected with reality, because we're being told there's going to be these limitations, there's going to be these, challenges. Things are going to be cut off. You're not going to have this freedom. And I'm not saying these things aren't happening, but we create our own reality. Like, I think if enough people have this mindset and this mentality, then yeah, we might as well throw in the towel. But I genuinely feel like most people don't feel this way. And most people are waking up and they are realizing, wait a second, we do have a connection to the planet. We do have the ability to create change, even if it means that we have to, die trying. Mars, Saturn, especially in Pisces, can be, I keep thinking about like that phrase, like I'll die on this hill, because Saturn is a mountain. Saturn is a hill. It's the what the goat kind of climbs up. And there's one thing I know about Capricorn or Saturn placements is that if there is not a hill, they will build a freaking hill. They will create a lot of challenges and upheavals, or they will have a lot of resistance until finally they realize that they're going to have to kind of climb to the top of it. Certainly Mars has connections and associations with death. So I kept thinking about that phrase of some people who are so ignorant and so angry and so incredibly morally wrong, and unwilling to admit faults or unwilling to take the blame, that they will die on that hill. There's something to be said about that conjunction in Pisces. I think a lot of it's going to be about our leadership. Saturn is about leaders. The unwillingness to take responsibility for people whose health has suffered, mental, physical, financial health suffering. And literally people saying, I will die on this hill. Now, by the same token, I think that you may see some people who are champions for change, people who are a part of these crypto movements, people who are really talking about, the need for financial freedom, or the fact that, we really have to change the agricultural system, or that we need to be focusing on bringing wealth and health and abundance to everybody, that everybody has the right to have some kind of connection to the earth. So some people saying, I will die on that hill. I will continue to keep talking about it, even if they silence me. I will continue to keep pushing forward, even if it's not something that really kind of meets the mainstream agenda. And so that I do like, because I think that some people are willing to say, like, fuck it. If it means that I'm the outcast, I'm the outcast. And if you think that I'm crazy, then you think that I'm crazy. But I'm going to continue to keep speaking up and saying these things. And so maybe you are one of those people who's listening to this and you're like, yeah, I am going to continue to keep doing that. Granted, the Mercury retrograde in Aries is a lot about whether or not that's instigating conflicts or fight. But I think the beauty of Mars, Saturn, and Pisces is that we can agree to disagree. We can still be friends and have different political affiliations or beliefs or different philosophies about religion or culture or the world. That shouldn't be something that separates us. That should be something that we don't necessarily even tolerate. It's just, it is what it is, right? And learning to, I think, have some of these debates without putting ourselves in a position of, I think, isolating ourselves. And I think a lot of this is about not repeating history, learning a lot from history. That's what Saturn is about, learning history and not repeating some of the past kind of patterns or, indiscretions that we have as a whole, within the world. All right. So those are just a few kind of examples that come to mind for me. I think that with Mars and Saturn, something else, especially in Pisces, watch for increased drive and ambition. It may not be something that's physical yet. It might be something that you're feeling. It might be something that you're praying for. It might be something you're dreaming about. But because Mars is connected with action and Saturn is about discipline, this is a really powerful time for manifesting any new goals or any new ambitions. And it can definitely increase motivation and determination to overcome, obstacles. So I don't want you guys to listen to this video and be like, oh, well, screw it. This is going to be a pain in the ass for the next 2 years. What's the point? Because if that's what you're hearing or that's what your takeaway is, then you're missing the point here. This sextile that's happening to Jupiter and Uranus is quite literally saying if we're willing to let dissolve or release old blockages, old karma, old fears, if we're willing to let this go, if we're not willing to let fear run the show, then we have so much more to gain, to receive, right? And that there will be definitely a need to also integrate some kind of faith or spiritual kind of thing with it. Like we need something that is going to keep us going more than just our goal. It has to be this feeling or this connection to something that's higher than ourselves, something that's bigger than us, because that's what Pisces is about. Watch for hard work and endurance because this combination can result in a strong focus and a hard work and perseverance. This aspect brings a sense of endurance and ability to work through challenges with patience and determination. I'm going to double down on that, especially because it's in Pisces, and Pisces is not a confrontational sign. It's a sign that's just like, I have my blinders on and, you know, this is the work that I'm doing kind of behind the scenes. But also I think it can mirror, you know, being kind to other people, because you never know what battles people are secretly fighting, you know, in their private life. You never know who's struggling with alcoholism or addiction. You never know who's struggling with grief. You never know who's potentially, you know, dealing with some very sensitive mental health issues. Because certainly Pisces has this other side to it that's just like, I just want to kind of vanish. You know, I just want it all to go away. I just want it all to be over. And unfortunately, if we're all acting like ostriches and just sticking our heads in the sand, just assuming that, you know, it's all going to be over, you know, wake me up when it's over, it's not going to get better. So it's also encouraging us to be willing to really look at these difficult situations and really ask ourselves, where have we been getting in our own way? Where have we created some of these situations for ourselves by not communicating, not speaking out, not asking for help, not telling other people we're struggling? There is some lesson in this that sometimes the strongest thing that you can do, the most courageous kind of form, I think, of strength is being like, you know, can you help me? You know, and being vulnerable and being able to talk about that and being able to discuss the things that maybe might feel uncomfortable and it might make you feel vulnerable. I think this is also going to be about frustration with restrictions because, you know, Saturn restricts and Mars gets frustrated. So when we see these two kind of come together, you know, we're going to feel the limits more than usual. And I do think that this is a feeling of being frustrated as one's desires or ambitions are being met with obstacles or delays. Something that I keep thinking about is like, you know, eventually when Jupiter kind of goes into Gemini, we will see in two separate periods this year. It's going to be in August and also in December that Jupiter in Gemini, which already doesn't have as much strength as it could, you know, because it's in its fall, moving through the opposite sign of Sag, it will square Saturn. So it's going to limit the positive effects of Jupiter. And for me, I feel like it's like that country song. What is it called? I think it's like the greatest blessings are unanswered prayers. And I think it's so perfect for, you know, this particular aspect because, you know, Jupiter has connections traditionally with Pisces. And so when we think about Saturn being in Pisces where things are kind of being delayed, we're not really seeing, you know, we're really supposed to be wrapping things up. We're not bringing up new things. We're not manifesting new things. We're closing things out before we come into this next cycle. And Jupiter is about belief, right? It's about prayer, especially connected to Pisces. It's about, in Gemini, what we think. So we're going to see at several points this year that when Jupiter squares Saturn, we're going to still feel those setbacks and we're going to kind of go, you know what? I think it was the best thing ever that thing that I was praying for, that thing that I was manifesting, or that thing that I really thought I wanted didn't come through because something else better came, you know? So I think we're going to see that as well. But I'm not going to candy coat it. You're going to feel frustrated with this aspect. It will be something that you'll feel immediately the next week or so, and then you'll see it kind of unfold over time. But there is a reason for the limitations. There's a reason that things are being slowed down right now because we're supposed to be kind of wrapping things up before we initiate new things. So yeah, expect that there can be obstacles and delays. You know, cars can take longer to get fixed. You might notice there's more, you know, delays traveling. There might be more kind of mechanical breakdowns, especially with Mars Saturn. We definitely see a lot of mechanical failures. And that being something that definitely happens. And then obviously this can become a costly thing with Jupiter being the dispositor of this. I've heard a lot of people being like, my car broke down, my computer broke. And also we're in the midst of a Mercury retrograde, you know, so it's like, it's a storm out there. And it can be frustrating, but at the same time, you know, what are we learning? How are we actually learning to become more self-sufficient, more independent, more capable? How are we learning to be taking action and not just kind of blowing things off? Because some of the frustrations that are coming up can be so irritating that we have no other option other than to change, right? And so that's another way of looking at it. Like when the pain of kind of staying the same is so much more difficult, so much more painful than actually initiating some kind of change, that's when you know that you're like, okay, we got to get this show on the road. Do expect some kind of deep transformation and growth because Pisces is a water sign and it does deal with compassion and transcendence and spirituality. And with the Mars-Saturn conjunction, it can bring about a period of deep transformation and growth, both personally and spiritually, and it can involve facing your fears, insecurities, and your past traumas in order to heal and evolve. So this is wonderful because the Mars-Saturn can be a lot of like, yes, it happened, and just take responsibility for it, or I'm taking responsibility for it, and then I want to let it go. I want to actually let it go this time so I can really move forward. This Chiron eclipse, man, I mean, it's definitely about kind of tapping into our inner healer and realizing and recognizing that some of the best healing can actually come from within ourselves personally. Not going and buying these, schemes or these fancy diets or going and seeing a bunch of specialists, or, I mean, in some cases, it's even, physical action and movement. I think of like Mars-Saturn conjunctions being like really strong sometimes for competitive swimmers, or people who do some kind of like search and rescue, or people who serve in the Navy. I've seen a lot of those placements, or professional divers even, where they have to have that form. They have to know exactly how to breathe and how to dive and when to go and the conditions of the water. And I think about how this is really kind of saying possibly one of the best things that we can be doing is A, working on our sleep, B, managing where we're repressing anger so we're not having blow-ups, and C, I think this is also about some of us kind of recognizing that we need to move our bodies around a little bit more. And if we're doing that and getting into a consistent schedule where we're like, okay, I'm going for a walk after lunch, or, I am going to the gym these days or whatever, that almost becomes our ritual within itself, right? For some people who are like really hardcore about like lifting weights and stuff, they'll tell you, they're like, I have to do it daily in order to feel like myself. Or people who are really, routine about running, like long distance runners, or, people who are used to competing in the Olympics, whatever. They need to have that consistently, and they do it in a way that is so perfect with their form that there's a reason why they continue, because Saturn can be about timing. So I could see this as some of us kind of getting into the zone where it's like, maybe for some of you guys, going to church or getting on your elliptical or getting on your walking pad, is like it's like going to church, basically. It becomes your area of worship. And a lot of this is treating your body like a temple. That's what it's about. And recognizing and realizing that, similar to that of a church, that if you're doing this regularly and you're both physically and spiritually taking better care of your body, it will vibrate. You will see things that will start to kind of shift energetically within you. So watch for that transformation. Yes, emotional intensity can come up. And so I think because Mars-Saturn can definitely bring about conflict, the Pisces side of this is very heightened in terms of sensitivity, empathy, intuition, and a greater awareness of one's own emotional boundaries. And so you may find yourself ugly crying or suddenly getting upset or flustered or frustrated. And then you realize like, wow, this is happening because I'm not having adequate boundaries, or I'm not communicating efficiently, or this is actually not feeling good for me. So my emotions are trying to tell me something. And then watch for responsibility and accountability. This is a big one right now, because there is a sense with the Sabian symbol of like wanting to wash your hands of any responsibility, and wanting to point the blame on other people rather than rising to the occasion and being like, yeah, I screwed up, or I should have done this better, or, I'm sorry, I'm going to work on it. And not just saying it, being about it. Because this Mercury retrograde in Aries is, I think, really about, words in action, not just talking about it, but actually making it happen, initiating, starting something new, and learning how to take accountability rather than shying away from responsibility. And I think a lot of us may be afraid to take the leap of faith right now because we're like, oh, it's going to be too hard to start over, or it's going to be too difficult to leave a relationship, or it's going to be too scary to relocate. But do it anyway, right? Do it anyway, especially because I think that if we are just pawning off any sense of responsibility for any major moves in our life right now, we may potentially be missing the sweetest, the most exciting, the most abundant adventure that life could offer us. And I think that's really coming from Jupiter conjunct Uranus. Like, this is about massive opportunities for joy, right? Jupiter has associations with being funny and exploration and soul growth and knowledge, and Uranus is about freedom. So some of us are just really itching to make this really big change in our life, and we're like, no, that's too scary, I could never do that, it's not possible. So instead of talking about all of the ways that it could never work out, start entertaining the ways that it could, and start actively taking action and making these things happen, rather than being like, oh, you know, I'm too old to do that now, or I have too many responsibilities, it could never be possible. No, these are the chances that you guys want to be taking. In recent years that we have had these conjunctions, I wanted to show you how it's played out, because like I said, we've had it every 2 years. So we had it in 2016, 2018, 2020, and 2022. So I want to show you guys these conjunctions that have happened in the past. And I will start with the most recent one, which happened 2 years ago in 2022. Okay, so when we had the most recent Saturn Mars conjunction, this was actually taking place in Aquarius. And it happened, and I remember when it happened. It happened April 4th, 2022, right around there. And this is when it was in conjunction at 22 degrees, okay, in Aquarius. So this happened in April, just around the exact same time we saw the Ukraine war escalate. Really, some of the tension started in February, but it really started escalating in the spring of 2022. And we've been in that ever since. It's been a 2-year process, right? So certainly when, you know, the nodes were involved in this square, it was a little bit more intense, because the North and the South node were in the fixed signs, and Mars obviously has connections to that South node in Scorpio. So it was going to be something that was going to be creating some kind of conflict among leaders, or, you know, groups, or kind of allies or alliances even politically. And the square to both kind of Uranus, but especially the North and South node, really kind of talked about like a situation that could be very critical for governments. And definitely it was a very controversial topic. It still is, about support of what's been going on over there. And Mars has connections obviously with death. So that was the last one. Something else we also saw in 2022, which was kind of taking place spring going into summer, but we saw 2 other surges with COVID. So we saw 2 other new kind of variations that kind of came out of COVID. And we definitely started to kind of see the rise and the fall of, okay, well, is it over? Is it not over? Like, what are we doing? And everybody got, you know, worked up about it. And we started seeing people who were focusing on boosters. And so we saw those waves. And then if we go 2 years back, even further, to March of 2020, you guys hear that and you still like shake? This was an interesting one, because this is when Mars came into conjunction with like Jupiter and Pluto, okay, right around the end of March. And then we saw Mars conjunct Saturn. And this is when we had the lockdowns. So this is when it happened, the end of March of 2020. So 2 of them in Aquarius. Now, at the time of this happening, you know, what's really interesting is that actually both times the dispositor was in Taurus. Okay, we saw Uranus in Taurus both times. It wasn't quite in a square in 2022 the way that we see it here, but it is in a 5-degree orb within a square. Obviously, Mars and Saturn were at 0 degrees, which is the beginning of some kind of new cycle pertaining to Aquarius. So at first it was, okay, we saw a lot of people that were quite literally limited and cut off from socializing. And we did see that really play out through 2022. I think it wasn't even until 2023 that, you know, Biden said, okay, that the pandemic is over. So it lasted for 2 years. For some people, it's still going. But Mars conjunct Saturn at 0 degrees was that initiatory point, right? That's just like, okay, society is now restricted. And we saw that play out. Now, Pluto has been there also. And Pluto's going to go back and forth over this degree, guys. If you're not aware of this, this is a very prominent degree. Even when Saturn and Jupiter came together in 2020, it was at 0 degrees. So it was basically saying it's a movement into this energy of Aquarius that's more about technology, internet, data, information, massive groups, and people kind of connecting in networks in a digital way. And obviously the impact that this had on technology. And I think also was a huge kind of point to really, I think, help people as a whole get behind this movement that's going to be happening with AI. So, you know, we'll see, but that definitely manifested. Now in, 2020, we also saw some other things. We saw eventually Jupiter, was it later that year? come into Aquarius, or was that? No, I guess not. That was a year later. So Saturn went in and out of this degree. That's what it was. And then Saturn hit it again with Jupiter. So that was in, I believe it was like winter solstice. Yeah. So then we had in 2020 this conjunction, which was still reverberating, you know, and it was like making it even bigger that, oh no, you know, should people be traveling? Oh no, should people be kind of around each other? So it almost made it like the new normal. Okay, let's go to 2018. So in 2018, we saw in August, and this was an interesting cycle because we saw like Mars and Jupiter both kind of like retrograding a little bit. And Mars was kind of delayed. Let's see, August? There we go. Or was that another cycle that I'm thinking about? August 2018. No, it wasn't there. Where was it? Here we go. So I guess it was earlier in the spring. Here we go. So Mars conjunct Saturn in the spring of 2018. Okay, at 8 degrees of Capricorn. Well, I mean, obviously a little stressful with the square going on with the Sun and Mercury retrograde, but we have an exalted Mars in Capricorn. It's very strong in this degree. We've got Saturn that's in its domicile in Capricorn, so it's kind of at home. It looks like this was happening right on the heels of a full moon in Libra. But if you guys remember what was going on in 2018, this was a real focus, actually. It started in March, but it really picked up momentum in April and May of the Me Too movement, where we saw a whole slew of actresses that were coming forward with claims of sexual assault in the industry, sparking this movement of women coming up and like talking about the fact that they've been, you know, assaulted and being more open and kind of honest and direct about that being an issue within society. Which then unfolded to a whole series of events really for 2 years where we saw a lot of scandals out in the world, especially involving politicians, of, you know, accusations and people who are in, you know, superior positions of power, Capricorn. It's interesting that it happened at 8 degrees, which is like a degree that is connected to Scorpio, so it is very much like about sex. So there's that. We also saw Brexit. The beginning negotiations and the agreement of Brexit was actually taking place in 2018, and so I could see this as like the breaking effect of some kind of like government agreement, and obviously, you know, the exit that kind of took place there. So there's definitely connections with all these cycles. Okay, let me show you another one. This is the one that I was thinking about in 2016. So in 2016, we saw in August, there you go. This is the one that I was talking about that was kind of wonky. So we saw Mars and like Mars was like in a retrograde earlier in the year. And then by the time we got to August, Mars was direct and it was coming into conjunction with Saturn. So this conjunction happened in Sagittarius. Obviously, you know, there was like if I remember correctly, like the whole like Russiagate thing was kind of going on, or some concerns or assumptions that there was connections between Trump and Putin, which makes sense because of like the connection with Saturn and like leadership and like foreigners and, you know, the squares that were happening to Neptune, which was like a lot of like who's colluding with who, what's going on. There was like lots of talk about data servers and things relating to particular unmentionable people in politics. And I think that it has a little bit of a different twist because, you know, Mars being conjunct Saturn in Sagittarius, where, you know, Sagittarius is a Jupiterian sign. So it doesn't have as much, it doesn't have as much, I think, boundaries. There's like a sense of challenging boundaries or challenging authority, or like a sense of self-righteousness that can kind of come with Saturn and Sag. So this conjunction in the square to Neptune, I think, is a lot of like challenging us. And like, look, we also had a bunch of planets in Virgo. Conflicts over relationships with foreigners, conflicts over, you know, possibly discussions revolving around relationships that, you know, people have in politics with other countries. Obviously, this was right around the time that we had the last total solar eclipse in America. If you guys remember the ones that were happening in Leo, it was right around the same time. But in August of 2016, we saw a massive earthquake in central Italy. And sometimes what we see with Mars Saturn is that there can be breaking apart of structures. Like I said, we can see structural damage, but with this, I think that was a combination of also the squares that we were seeing to the nodes as well, and Jupiter being the dispositor of Saturn, so it could be about creating some kind of crisis relating to the Earth. We saw the Colombian peace deal in Colombia. We also saw a major anthrax outbreak in Russia. Obviously, then we had that big kind of change that was happening in politics that also kind of manifested at the end of 2016. So definitely things happen with these aspects, guys. I mean, I think about this one being at 14 degrees, and I think it's going to be more about restrictions and limitations when it comes to like land and food and money, because it has that Taurus effect, but I don't think it's anything that people see coming. Now, I did a little bit of more astrological research. I'm just going to show you two more, I swear. We've got the last time that Mars and Saturn actually met in Pisces. So for those of you guys who are old enough to remember, this was in March of 1994. And here we go. All right. Oh, this is 2004. Gotta keep going. 1994. Okay. There we go. And when this conjunction was taking place, it was in Pisces. Granted, it was at 5 degrees, so it was a different degree. So here we go. Jupiter at the time was in a trine to Scorpio. I mean, I think a lot of like the grunge movement, Pisces can be about music. It can be also about art. It can be about kind of like film and cinema. A lot of things that were starting to kind of come up relating to like sci-fi. A lot of things that were starting to come up also in regards to changes in music. So this was at 5, so it was going to deal more with like obviously some leadership issues that were kind of going on, issues also pertaining to, I think, oil and things that were kind of taking place in the mid-90s. But specifically, here's a positive manifestation that kind of came from this particular conjunction, because it can be good things. It can be about bringing leaders together, or it can be about creating form out of something that seems hard to kind of comprehend. We had the first World Wide Web conference that took place in, I think, March or April of 1994. Hello, March of 1994. Sorry, guys, Mercury retrograde. And that's amazing, because when you think about what was happening, with the internet, for many of us, it was like this concept that we could not grasp, we could not understand. It was like, what do you mean you can get on this box and it plugs into your, your wall where your phone goes, and then suddenly you can connect with people all over the world? It was bringing structure to something that seemed unimaginable, impossible. It was also connecting us more strongly to screens. So also in the mid-90s, what became popular? Well, I remember my parents getting a cell phone. That was like a big deal. They had this like chunky old Nokia phone, and it was kind of like, okay, if you leave, you have the cell phone. I know for some of you guys who are, kind of like a little bit younger, you've always seen cell phones. You've always seen iPads. I can officially say I'm a part of that generation of people. I think I was telling my husband the other day, I think we're the last like generation personally that remembers, what it was like to go out and play and ride around on your bikes and not have a cell phone and not be on an iPad and not watch YouTube. Not that we don't love these things, but I remember the internet, and I remember cell phones and what life was like before a lot of this stuff. And I remember specifically 1994 to 1998. Internet, computers, Walkmans, like all of these things that allowed us to have access to like music and communication and connection became more prominent because of this conjunction. I realize this now. So I think that's kind of cool. Another amazing aspect that came from this one in Pisces was that Nelson Mandela became the first Black president in South Africa. So after his long story of what he dealt with imprisonment, Nelson Mandela was sworn in as South Africa's first Black president in May of 1994. And this marked a historic moment, symbolizing the end of racial segregation and the beginning of a new era for democracy in South Africa and reconnecting to that culture. Beautiful things, right? I think of Mars Saturn as being like, I'm stuck, I'm imprisoned, I'm in this glass case of emotion, Anchorman. But this can quite literally take somebody who's been a prisoner, a political prisoner, a war prisoner, and help them rise to the top and become a leader. and where they've overcome challenges and where they've had setbacks and where they had little to no faith or no opportunity, that they actually, they changed the narrative, right? They changed that story and they were able to kind of achieve their destiny. Awesome aspects. So in that sense, for me, it feels really exciting because there's a lot of like, well, I have this dream or I have this idea and I don't know how to get it out there, or I don't know how to show it to the world, or I feel very disempowered, but like how you can use that as your motivation and end up leading other people and doing it in a way that's incredibly inspiring, and also providing a significant cultural change, providing peace. Pretty amazing stuff. Okay, one more, just because I want to show you guys, as astrologers, the only way that we get good at making predictions is we have to look at the past. And I have a really strong Saturn, so I definitely like looking at past conjunctions. Okay, so for those of you guys who are some of the elders that watch my videos, shout out to you. You guys don't get enough credit, but we're going to go back to 1966. So this was the last time that we saw this conjunction, well, not the last time. The last time was 1994, but prior to that was the spring of 1966. And this was an interesting conjunction because when this happened, it was happening in Pisces. It looks like it was happening around 17 degrees. So kind of cool that like both when we had the mid 90s, it was in a Leo degree. So we saw a lot of really interesting music. And I mean, like, come on, like the boy bands, the pop music, the grunge, everything that happened in the mid 90s, the music was so good. And now we see this in the 60s where we have yet another Leo degree. Okay, which also the mid 60s had some of like the most amazing music. I know some of you guys will argue with me on that, but I kind of feel like, I don't know, like 65 to like 72, 73. At least that's like some of my, kind of my favorite music comes from that era. So we've got another one that's in Leo. A little different of a flavor because it was also with the moon. So collectively, everybody was feeling this like emotional limitation and agitation and like wanting to fight for something. And it also had a conjunction to Chiron, and Mercury was there too. So what happened when this conjunction happened with the mid-60s? Obviously, one of the most significant topics that came up this particular year in the spring was the anti-Vietnam War protests. Anti-Vietnam War protests continued to escalate during this period. The protests were a response to the growing American involvement in the Vietnam War and the draft deferment test in the US, which was a method for students to avoid being drafted into the military. People were burning their draft cards. You saw people out in the streets and there was all kinds of like, people who were, putting flowers and stuff into soldiers' hair and, offering them things and offerings of peace, and basically coming out and saying, we don't want war. Very Pisces, right? So I think about that and I wonder if we're going to see some similarities here. I feel like for a lot of us now, it's about that connection to Jupiter in Taurus, where people are starting to wake up and they're realizing that this whole agenda for war is primarily just to have land grabs, to take over natural resources, to control food, and to continue to feed the military industrial complex and the connection to the banks. That's what this is about. And so people are realizing this, and they're also realizing that it's devaluing the dollar. They're realizing that their tax dollars are going towards it. They're going to realize that there's going to be an increase in goods and also services because it's going to impact all of our resources. So I'm wondering if we're going to see something similar. Obviously, there was a lot of really gnarly, protests that were going on. I think about a lot of protests where you saw people who were lighting themselves on fire and they were protesting and saying that they weren't going to, continue to support a war. We saw like monks that were doing that in the 60s. Sad stuff, but I definitely feel like we may see some echoes of the past. So like, were you around during that time? You want to give us any feedback? I'd love to hear because obviously I wasn't there. Oh, and I lied. I have one more. I didn't see it till just now. Sorry. And then here's the last one. I swear this one is the last one. So in the spring of 1936, which also was not alive, and I'm sure many of you were not either, but if you were born then, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment. So we've got, in the spring of 1936, we had a Mars-Saturn conjunction in Pisces here. And this one's interesting. This also happened at an 8, very similar to the one that we had in Capricorn, okay? Ruled by Jupiter. Jupiter is squaring. So we're going to see something similar, guys. This year, Jupiter is going to end up being in Gemini. So we're going to receive a square. It's not in a square now. It's in a sextile. So it's supporting, but you'll see the square. April 1936. Okay, so this conjunction happened in the end of January, but by April, this was going down. The Spanish Civil War began. The conflict pitted the left Republicans against the right-wing nationalists led by General Francisco Franco. The war would last until 1939, okay? So going on 2-3 years. So the whole cycle. This significantly impacted Europe's political landscape with Nazi Germany and fascist Italy supporting France nationalists while the Soviet Union backed the Republicans. So I could see this being something that was kind of pitting countries against each other. And a lot of it might have been about their political beliefs, their religious ideals, the conflict that they were having in regards to, you know, freedoms of what people were practicing and believing in, condemning people for their religion, for their looks. Sounds very kind of like mutable squarish to me, but yeah, I had to throw that in there. So these are what we've seen throughout history. The truth is that even though a Mars-Saturn conjunction can be really agitating, I feel like the one that we're actually having could potentially be so much better. It could be so much better. It could give us the opportunity to really break through boundaries. So what are my key takeaways here? Okay, well, Jupiter is the dispositor, so Jupiter ultimately wants to bring us good things. I believe I'd be paying attention to what's going on in your life and also in the world around the 10th. Can this mean that there is another earthquake coming because the moon's going to hit Jupiter and Uranus and it's going to sextile Mars and Saturn? Yes, I'm not a specialist in this department, but we see the Earth rock, rattle, and roll with conjunctions involving Uranus. I think this is actually kind of around until mid-May. Until we start to see that Jupiter-Uranus conjunction separate. But when you have both of these things that are reverberating off of each other, is it possible? Yes. And I also think that what's important to mention is that Mars being the dispositor of all these placements in Aries, right? Mars is ruling Venus, the North Node, Chiron, the Sun, Mercury, and Mercury is retrograde. So this is about us realizing that things are ending, dissolving, releasing, or going astray. But are you going to lose your cool? Right? Are you going to pop off about it? Or are you just going to kind of take a breath, count to 10 and be like, you know what, the universe handles the details. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen. There's no point in me worrying about the end of the world or assuming worst case scenario or feeling like it's the apocalypse and running around with my chicken, like a chicken with its head cut off. That's not going to help anybody. That's going to perpetuate the conflict. We want to get quiet. We want to get cool, calm, collected. We want to have faith that it's not that things are ending, but it's that things are beginning. So the ending makes way for the beginning, you know? You will feel exhausted. There will be sleep issues. There will be sleep disturbances. My recommendation is have a solid sleep routine. Take a bath or a shower before you go to bed. Work with some essential oils. Massage your feet. Soak your feet. Consider, you know, working with an Eastern practitioner, doing some acupuncture, some cupping, maybe some massage. Something that's going to help connect you to your body so that way you're not feeling as stressed out or burnt out. Watch for symptoms of issues pertaining to inflammation. That could be something else that can kind of come up where we're starting to feel, you know, like our body is trying to tell us something where we have aches and pains. And it can be really beneficial to be cutting anything that's going to be connected to toxins. It can be also about cutting alcohol. It can be about doing fasting. This can also be about doing heavy metal detoxes and things that are going to be cutting that out. Mars is a knife, right? So it's like, okay, I'm removing this from my diet. So actually, you know, considering looking at, you know, a diet where you're eliminating things to see how your body responds. Or maybe you decide to try the Whole30 program and you're like, I'm just going to eat whole foods. To me, it's become normal now since, you know, 2019, it's kind of been like my MO. I decided, I was like, I don't want to eat stuff in cans. I won't buy frozen stuff. Generally, I don't want to buy processed stuff. Like, it's a lot more work. But when I go to the grocery store, 90% of what I buy, you can identify what the food is, whether it's a meat, produce, fruit, or dairy, you know what it is. And that's how I choose to live my life. I know not everybody follows that and it takes a lot of time and not everybody has that. But I could see this being a movement where a lot of people are kind of realizing like, I need to eat real food. You know, I need to see what it is. And if I can't pronounce it, and if I don't know what's on the label, and if I don't know what it does, I'm not eating it. It's amazing to me. I've spoken to so many friends over the years who have asked me, well, how do I do it? And how does it work? And I'm like, it's very simple. Go to the grocery store and avoid the center aisles and buy things on the outer aisles and like read the labels. And ideally, you're buying food that doesn't have a label unless you're getting broth or butter or eggs, you know. And making that conscious shift of being like, I know what I'm eating can do wonders for the body. And so I've seen a lot of stuff on social media, people being like, I'm doing detoxes or cleanses, or, you know, I am deciding to only eat this, you know, particular type of food. And everybody's going to have their own opinion about that. But I do think that one of the ways this could materialize is that we start seeing shortages or limitations on food. We could see that, you know, there are certain things that we don't have access to, we can't buy. You know, if we end up seeing that there is more conflict in parts of the world, that can have an impact on import-export. And equally, I think this is going to be about people who are going to be struggling to get what they need. There is a sense of needing to acknowledge those who are homeless, those who can't, you know, put food on the table, those who are also struggling. And, you know, if you are, I could see Mars-Saturn as being support that's coming from churches, that's coming from donation centers, that's coming from, you know, food drives and other things. And that can be a wonderful way of being able to kind of like go and get the support that you need. And if you're in a position of giving, then you give, right? You could be Saturn, basically. I would also watch for issues with, okay, so I tried to keep everything pretty positive, but I'm gonna tell you guys some of the things that I think. So if you're sensitive to this stuff, you've been forewarned. Pisces is hospitals, okay? So very rarely do I say I guarantee these things will happen, because A, it puts me in a position of looking like an asshole, and B, nobody can predict anything 100%. I believe that astrology, about 75% of the time, it is destined. The things that happen are destined. But I feel like there's another 25% that's free will. And so something I've been thinking about a lot with these transits and the solar eclipse is like that free will is stronger than any astrological influence. And I make a point of also telling my clients that, because I've noticed there's been like an uptick in anxiety about, oh my God, this is what I'm hearing, this is what's going to happen. You have the ability to create free will. You were born into your natal chart with all of the mappings of what you could be, but also you have a choice. So I say that because I believe that it's very likely the things I'm about to tell you will happen, because I've studied some of the other charts, and I do think that we will see this materialize over certain time periods. One is trouble with hospitals, okay? Pisces rules hospitals, it rules jails, and it rules anything about those who are homeless or those who are seeking asylum. Okay, and so trouble is Mars. So Mars is bringing the trouble. So it's basically saying there is going to be more Mars-related things. Well, Mars in traditional astrology was connected to illness, to violence, to war, to death, right? It has a direct connection to Scorpio. And so it is saying that there are going to be more of these things, but it's going to be because of people not having enough money, people not having enough food. People aren't necessarily dying just because of war. They're going to die because they're going to starve. They're going to be on the streets. Homelessness is going to be a real issue the next 2 years with these conjunctions. However, the positive is the sextile to Jupiter and Uranus, where it's like you're going to see people who are going to be doing guerrilla gardening. You're going to see people who are going to create community gardens where they're going to want to help feed other people, or they're going to trade food, or they're going to trade resources. And that's the way out, right? We've been given an out with this conjunction, thank goddess. But that's how I see this. Alternative economies and ways of exchanging, I think, is going to be a big theme. I do feel like we're going to see problems with jails. I think we're going to see lots of issues with inmates, and we're going to be hearing about cruel and unusual treatment. I think we're going to be hearing more about the money that's going into the prison system, and why there is a whole streamlined agenda to be able to convict people, and certain people of certain backgrounds, nationalities, or classes are more likely to be incarcerated, less likely to have any fair treatment, and private prisons are making a ton of money off of it. And it's all this incestuous system. I do anticipate that we're going to hear more about hospital shortages, issues with pharmaceuticals, limitations of medications. People are going to also be more willing to cut back on medications and say, I don't want to take that. How do I change my diet? How do I change my lifestyle? Give me something natural. And I think that this is true, especially for obesity, because Taurus can be about weight, thyroid issues, mental health issues. And I think that we're going to be realizing that when you really think about it, all of these compounds that are in medication are derivative of herbs and the planet. It wouldn't be made if it wasn't grown here. These two things have to correspond. Yes, synthetic things can be made, but ultimately that's coming from natural substances. So I can see collectively, especially with this retrograde happening at the time, that people are realizing we have to take our health back. Just taking a pill or just paying for something or just trying to have a quick fix mentality isn't going to fix it. And I come from the frame of mind that we need to look at both sides. Obviously, if you're in a situation where you're having a heart attack or you're having an aneurysm or something's going on, like 10 times out of 10, people are going to be like, take me to the hospital. I need to see a doctor, and we need those people in society. But we also need the medical system not being paid out by Big Pharma. We also need to be better educating our students in med school about not just diagnosing and giving treatment, but actually talking to them about lifestyle. Talking to our communities about it, about being active, about what we're eating, more information that's also coming out about what we're consuming. But I do think that we're going to be hearing more about people who are going to be hospitalized and having issues pertaining to that, especially things connecting to their feet, their mental health, things connecting to their immune system. Obviously, Mars has to deal with shots as well, I have to say that, and conflict and things that are about action. We might see more issues also revolving around surgery and challenges when it comes to surgery. And something else that comes up for me is leadership issues, finding out that there are some cruel behaviors going on behind closed doors and people who are quite literally pushing depopulation agendas, as crazy as that sounds, and doing some very inhumane things and denying people what their natural needs are. I think about Jupiter and Uranus is like these carbon taxes that are going on in Canada, the push for, telling people that they have to, sell their homes or give their homes away to immigrants. This push that we're seeing also for, people to have electric vehicles, but, not really realizing the true implications of what happens if there is limited energy supplies, that kind of stuff. And then also the things that we're doing. We hear about like the MAID program going on in Canada as well. And I could think about Mars Saturn as being an encouragement and a push towards, assisted suicide. And that's been something I've been talking about for months, and it just hasn't really started kind of catching up until recently. Definitely government oversight would be Saturn with Mars. And so that could be government oversight when it comes to assisted suicide, but other programs pertaining to health and whether or not you're deemed worthy of getting medical care. I think about this is also government oversight and also, something that's going to be happening pertaining to how you're getting your money, where you're spending your money, whether or not you can shop. These are real things. Feeling victimized in some way. I think I touched on that. Attacks on water. I've said this a lot. I just saw another boat that had to get kind of reined in. I think it was in New York. And so it's bizarre, right? We're seeing all of these boats that are suddenly, they cannot be controlled, and they're kind of doing all this weird stuff with bridges. Mars, Saturn. Saturn is the structure, right? Mars is moving. It's restriction in terms of where it can go. It's causing collision, or it's causing some kind of conflict, which is doing what? Making prices go up, making it harder for us to get certain things, making it difficult for us to be able to transport stuff. That's literally the astrology in action. Setbacks limit challenges to our beliefs in some way, what we believe. For some of you guys, this will feel like a crisis of faith. More religious conflict and religious wars, conflicts over borders and barriers, quite literally a showdown that should be coming to a border near you. Just being here in Central Texas, I'm just kind of, watching the news and seeing what's kind of going on. But I am anticipating this is going to be about, the National Guard coming out here to Texas and being more involved in protecting the border, and also things pertaining to, helping build the necessary, boundaries, because Mars Saturn can be about kind of organizing and telling them where to put things, certain barriers. But this can be in other places as well. I mean, I was just listening to a podcast earlier today that was talking about how this escalating tension between Iran and Israel is happening, and you're hearing all of this stuff about, Israelis that are freaking out and going to the grocery store and cleaning all the grocery store shelves, right? Fearful Pisces of an impending conflict or war, Mars Saturn, and how it's sending people into like a, spree where they're going to the banks, and we're seeing bank runs on ATMs over there. Or we're seeing that they're buying up all the food in the grocery stores because they're afraid that if they don't have cash, or if they don't have the resources, and if there is some kind of conflict, then they're not going to have what they need. In that podcast I was listening to, they were talking about how most U.S. Citizens are not prepared. They don't have more than 2 or 3 days worth of food on hand in general. And so it's kind of a little dissettling, you know, that we've been hearing all this weirdness about the eclipse and be prepared and have your this and have your that. And that's very much the embodiment of this conjunction. Being told by, you know, leadership, hey, be prepared in case these things happen. And the reality is we should have that stuff anyway, right? Even if it's just grabbing something extra at the grocery store or taking an extra $100, you know, out and stashing it somewhere in case we need it if we're going somewhere, or God forbid we can't go to a bank. These are things that I really feel like the Mercury retrograde and the solar eclipse is saying. It pays to be prepared, right? Literally, Venus is the dispositor of this. It pays to be prepared. So what? So if it ends up being nothing, then it's nothing. But if it's something, you're going to be that much further ahead. And limits to personal possessions. Okay, and I feel very strongly about this. You may not agree with me, but Taurus is land. So with Jupiter coming in conjunction with Uranus, it's some dramatic laws revolving around, you know, public land, parks, national parks, possession and ownerships of land, making it much more difficult or challenging to possess, and also making it much more expensive if you own. So property taxes, carbon taxes, things revolving around, you know, like, what is it? They were saying it was unrealized, what is it? The word that I'm thinking of. Some tax that they're creating for like some unrealized like asset or wealth that you have accumulated and then getting taxed for it. Like these kinds of things, because it's stuff that you don't see coming or you don't realize, and then it grows, right? Now, for some of you guys, it could be, you know, a little bit of effort and hard work and determination and visualization leads to miraculous results. And I'm definitely hoping that that's the case for you, very much so. Now, in closing, I just want to show you guys a few of the reactivation points. That's what I call this. This is when you're going to see either, you know, Saturn return to this degree, or you're going to see other aspects that are going to square or make aspects to this degree. Like I said, it's a 2-year phase. So up until 2026, we will be feeling the effects of this. But the first period that I saw that I thought was really interesting was going to be the end of July. So July 29th through August 12th. Now, why did I pick this? Okay. So this is when we're going to see Jupiter and Mars start coming into this square. So it actually looks closer to like right about here. So let's say July 30th. Okay. So July 30th, Jupiter's in Gemini. It starts coming into the same, you know, 15-degree orb, and it will be squaring that Mars-Saturn conjunction. So when we think about Jupiter, Jupiter makes things bigger, right? It's about travel, beliefs, education, knowledge, religion, celebrations. And in Gemini, it's a little ADD. Like it's a little bit of like, oh, what's that? Look over there. Like it's hard to stay in one place. So one manifestation that I definitely have to tell you guys that I think across the board with Jupiter square Saturn and this point is going to be short attention spans. Rapid news coming out, you know, all the time that's going to be distracting or trying to take us away from, you know, where there is lack of direction, where there is lack of leadership, point blank. But you'll see from the end of July into about mid-August that when Jupiter and also Mars come into conjunction, it's squaring that 15-degree point that we're going to have this conjunction. So making some of the effects of this incoming conjunction feel bigger, right? And there's more talk. Ironically, when this is happening, we're also going to see a Mercury retrograde. And this is incredibly important because not only is Jupiter squaring the Mars-Saturn, where it's saying you have to try harder, you have to speak more, you have to get active, you have to get writing, moving, learning, but Mercury is the dispositor of Jupiter and Mars. And so when Mercury is turning retrograde, one of the first things Mercury is going to do is it's going to come into conjunction with Venus, which is about health. And Venus is not happy in Virgo. So there's going to be some news coming out about some changes regarding around health and job numbers. Just, you know, sidebar Q3, we're going to see, you know, there is going to be, I think, high unemployment rates. I think we're going to see a lot of layoffs. Jupiter and Gemini we always see that because it does represent some kind of major fluctuation too with jobs and trade. Anyway, so when this happens, right, this Mercury retrograde conjunct Venus, it is kind of featuring, you know, some kind of news that's coming out suddenly, Mars, Jupiter, and Gemini, some rush of information that is squaring Saturn and also the Mars-Saturn conjunction. So I see this as headlines about a health crisis, specifically respiratory or something breathing related. Why? Gemini is the lungs. It's also about mobility and moving around and connecting with people. So we're going to kind of see like, oh, there's something kind of going on, and this will be squaring that. Too many aspects for me to say that it's nothing. I hope I'm wrong. Obviously I do. But I feel very strongly that some of this stuff might start sooner. It may just not become really, really out in the news and mainstream until closer to the end of July, beginning of August. Now, when we look at this archetypally, you know, now we've got Mars coming into a square with Saturn, which means Saturn says, I want limitations, and Mars says, well, I want to go, or I want to travel, or I want to speak, you know, I want to get on social media. And Mars Jupiter is a very warrior spirit, but they're fighting with words. They're not physically fighting. This is an intellectual conjunction. So they're wanting to speak out against what? Authority, censorship, right? Mars, you know, is basically saying, you're not going to tell me what to do. We're going to see more challenges with social media. We're going to see more censorship than you've ever seen before. And I know that sounds like crazy, but you will. Then we're going to see on or around the 17th of September. So this is going to be when we have the lunar eclipse in Pisces. So also surprise, we're having new eclipse cycles that are coming in this fall. This will be the first one in Pisces that we've seen in like 8 or 9 years. The first one of this cycle so far, even though the nodes don't move till early next year. But this will be conjunct Saturn. Okay, it's a 10-degree orb, but it's still, you know, the moon is in detriment here between Neptune and Saturn. Not an easy place to be, especially having an eclipse. And oh, by the way, the ruler is square Jupiter. So we see this like all over the place. You know, a lunar eclipse in Pisces, it's where people get kind of weird. It's like, oh my God, what's happening? Everything's falling apart. What's going on? You know, that's how people are going to feel. There's going to be some sense of like unknowing what the future holds. And the Jupiter square to this is just going to amplify that. I believe that this is the beginning of COVID 2.0. Personally, that's what I think. And a lot of other astrologers have said similar things without saying it so abruptly. But I think it'll be something that's going to manifest more, you know, more so strongly, I think, at the beginning of 2025. But this Saturn being retrograde at 15 degrees, the same as the Mars and the Saturn conjunction, still in a square to Jupiter, is saying that, well, the truth will set you free, or more people are having challenges, driving around, traveling, getting anywhere, you know, getting anywhere by air, things of that nature. And that's going to be baked into the lunar eclipse in Pisces. Woof. And then, oh, by the way, Mercury is in opposition to Saturn. Mercury is in its domicile, square Jupiter in its fall, and making an opposition to Saturn. This is definitely going to be some kind of like fear-mongering revolving around like going out, doing things, voting, right? Connecting with your neighborhood, Jupiter in the square. And then we're going to see September 20th through October 6th. This is going to be Saturn retrograde over the 14 degrees. So during this period, Saturn will be between, you know, the 15 and 14 degrees. So that'll be until October 6th. Okay, and then after that point, you know, while we're in that period of like 3 weeks or so, we're integrating, we're reviewing the lessons of some sort. That's what's happening. All right, then December 17th, this is 2024, we're in 2024. December 17th through January 8th, Saturn will return to 14 degrees of Pisces, okay? So it's now the kind of the completing point, but oh, surprise, Jupiter is also retrograde and squaring as well. So we see pretty prominently in August, then again at the end of December, the Jupiter-Saturn square. And essentially, Saturn wants that limitation. Jupiter wants the freedom. It wants to talk. It wants to get out. It wants to drive. It wants to share. But shadow Saturn is kind of being like, no, we don't want that talked about, or we don't want those videos getting out, or there's going to be some kind of move for like censorship when it comes to like social media or travel. And this will limit Gemini things. Okay, guys, especially when you see the Saturn-Jupiter square happen, look at where Mercury is. at least we have mutual reception. Mercury's in a Jupiter sign, Jupiter's in a mercurial sign. They're both square Saturn. They're both like, yeah, this is fucked. They're agreeing, like whatever's going on right now is like really like not working. And it's very confusing. And, I've said some pretty bold stuff. I've said for a long time, and I feel that this is very true now. I personally am not convinced there's going to be an election. And I hope, once again, I'm wrong, but I'm very hoping that doesn't happen. Part of my mind says, well, there won't be one. And the other part of my mind says, well, there will be an election, but there's going to be a major dispute about who the president will be. Okay, I know, 2 different predictions. But the more that I look at this, I'm like, yeah, there's going to be some really conflicting stuff that's going to be happening. We obviously have the elections in November, but I really feel like this is going to be a particularly contentious time, confusing with information, not to mention Mars will be in opposition to Pluto, which is a whole other can of worms. But I think that October through January is some pretty intense astrology. Between this playing out and then the Mars-Pluto opposition, I think we're going to see unfortunately, a lot of conflict in the world. And I think that one of the biggest manifestations that we're going to see, just with Jupiter squaring the Mars-Saturn conjunction and Saturn being back, is limitation of Gemini things. So car, travel, media, phones, communication, online platforms, major censorship periods, issues with truth, problems with vehicles, strife with legal documents or IDs. I'm wondering if there is going to be some sort of new identification or something that people are being required to share, especially to travel. And then we get to 2025. So in 2025, I'm looking at March 17th through the 25th and 17th through the 31st, of March 2025. This will be Jupiter squaring again. So Jupiter returns to 14 degrees. It's not squaring Saturn, but we will see a pretty extended Saturn-Jupiter square once Saturn goes into Aries, Jupiter goes into Cancer. So that'll repeat a little bit next year, diminishing the qualities basically of Jupiter. So this will be the last square. And I think that when we see these squares between Jupiter and Saturn, these will be increased periods of feeling limitation or like less optimistic. And then we're going to see in November of 2025, because remember, the cycle lasts 2 years. So then November 16th of 2025 through the December 2nd, then the North Node is conjunct this degree. So because we have not completed the 2-year cycle, this North Node is really important. Well, what's going to happen here? North Node is activating the Mars-Saturn conjunction. Maybe by then it's becoming normal. Maybe we're really doing, some of this hard work then. This is going to be ruled by Jupiter, and Jupiter is in its, it's in its domicile, its exaltation of Cancer, which means it performs very well here. Expanding emotions, expanding home, expanding family-related things, and it's trining the North Node Saturn. Get ready to spend more time at home, guys. I know this sounds crazy, but it's about being self-sufficient and independent and being much more connected to our homes, our family, our community. That's what this is about. And if you don't have one, it's creating that, right? Becoming a part of that. I do think that with the North Node conjunct Saturn, that is kind of saying to us that we have to be independent. We have to be strong. We have to have faith. We have to believe. We have to be working at that. Next year, Saturn and Neptune will actually go into Aries and then retrograde back into Pisces. So when this happens collectively, when these planets are in like the final degrees, it's kind of like, okay, there are things that need to kind of come to an end so something new can kind of be rebuilt. So we will see that. And I think that the Jupiter trine is particularly fortuitous. Jupiter trine Saturn is saying that as long as we have form, we have growth. Jupiter trine Neptune, as long as we have faith, then we have growth. So it'll be positive, even though it's going to be, I would say fall of 2024 through 2025, life is going to be completely different. We're going to see some events that are going to happen at the end of this year that is going to dramatically change our life. I mean, everybody, it doesn't really matter where you live. And then we're going to see in April of 2026, this is when a new cycle begins. So we're in this until 2026. So in April of 2026, Mars is conjuncting Saturn in Aries. So we've got Mars and its home sign. It's conjuncting Saturn, which is, in its fall here. It's not happy being in Aries. And Mars, Saturn, and Aries is a totally different twist, especially with a slight square to Jupiter. So this is saying, once again, there's a lot of like hard work, motivation, direction, you know, in order to embrace more Cancerian themes. You know, new homes, new growth, new places that we're living, new growth for the way that we look at our homeland, our relationship to our roots and to our past. And obviously, you know, we're going to see Mercury is going to be nearby and Neptune is going to be nearby. And this is a north node now that's ruled by Jupiter. And it's basically saying that, like, by the time we get to 2025, 2026, people are going to have to be more self-sufficient, independent, self-reliant, physically active, capable, and brave. So you guys can listen and heed my advice now, and you can start getting with the program and kind of saying to yourself, okay, what kind of a life do I want to build? What does that look like? What changes or cutbacks or sacrifices do I have to make now to become more self-sufficient and independent, so I don't feel reliant on external circumstances or other people or the government or my family or a job that I hate, because that's kind of more or less what we're dealing with right now. I hope this was helpful. I hope this was giving you lots of insight and inspiration and some food for thought into how to navigate this kind of tricky combination. I'm sending you guys all good vibes throughout this week. If you guys like this video, please give me a thumbs up, leave me a comment, let me know how you're feeling with this energy. How is it manifesting for you? And how are you keeping a glasses half full mentality? Let's talk about the silver linings and the things that are going well in our life right now. Leave me those comments below. And don't forget to subscribe. It really kind of helps the channel grow. If you guys like my style of reading, if you want to learn astrology with me, I teach it. If you guys want to book a one-on-one reading with me, I've got availability. You can check out my website in the description below at beyondtheveiltarot.com. Would love to talk to you about your transits or your natal chart or anything that you guys have going on right now. My books are open starting in July. And check out my courses while you're there. Sign up for my newsletter so you're alerted as to when we have new courses coming out. I'm working on some new stuff for you guys. I'm kind of putting it together as to when it's going to be coming out later this spring and into the summer. So I'm excited about that, and I'll be sharing that with you all soon. I hope you enjoy the rest of your week, and I'll catch you guys back here on Thursday, where we're all going to talk about this incoming Mercury Cazimi. Take care.